Okay. Yes, so our next presenter is Tatenda, who will be speaking on her work in the collective that she forms. They're called Rera, Letsema. Without taking up too much time in the program, Tatenda, over to you.
I'm going to come back and sit down and just need help with this. What do you want? I want to keep the PowerPoint on the loop. Yeah. So I'm presenting on behalf of, well, not on behalf, I'm one half of Rera, Letsema, which is a creative research platform and collective that was started in May last year. The title of the paper is "The Revolution Will Be Self-Organized: Footnotes on Critical Collective Practice." The title was debated, I lost, so I'll just begin and go into it. The current growth and development of collectives not only highlights the ever-narrowing access to spaces of visibility, it even more potently reflects questions of what collective creative practice ought to look like and do at this moment. I'm also going to butcher some European names, so apologies for that. Maybrit Bergen discusses self-organization as being inscribed in the model of the rhizome, a concept developed to describe the production and movement of desire in contemporary society. Originating from the world of botanics, the term is most easily understood as a system structured like the multiples of roots in grass. And in the rhizomatic condition, strategies, negotiations of power, and relations are constantly changing. It is a system that privileges sideways ordering and movement over center-periphery relations. This paper presents observations and reflections on the Proclamation Project, the first residency by Rera, Letsema, hosted at Kilakatla Library from the 10th of July to the 6th of August in 2017. The project's main objective was to explore the various modes of creative collaborative research, as well as the use of virtual spaces as platforms for research from collectives and independent artists. The project is already online, hence the images of the PowerPoint, focused on the visibility of several emerging collective and individual artistic productions that are occurring in Johannesburg. The residency produced a series of podcasts, conversations, studio sessions, and momentary productions functioning as discussion forums that replicate some of the processes of discussion many emerging artists engage in via the online and in conversations in social circles. The importance was in the highlighting, and the provision of visibility and the elevation of these artists, their ideas and practices, as well as the fostering of a community of practitioners that exchange practical and intellectual research. The creation of an economy that serves the artists who participated in the project and others who might need a research platform like ours to realize more succinctly their ideas or their places in their practice. Rera, Letsema was developed in response to the knowledge that there is little space that provides emerging artists with safe spaces to discuss and contemplate their positions and experiences as practitioners. Although social media and online platforms do provide some of this, in a career that is increasingly isolating, the online might provide an immediate community, but does not have longevity. Social media and virtual online platforms change the rules of engagement for artists as well as their audiences, but also give more power to emerging artists as opposed to relying on established art spaces. They also allow for artists to work collaboratively to better present themselves, both as individual and as collectives. There are a huge number of artists with large presences and followings online, but they do not have the same social or economic capital in the art world. However, there is a detriment to the reliance on online platforms as a means of production and visibility. Artists can be condensed, derailed, or pressured to make work that is palatable or trendy, the type of work that is easily rewarded. But this, of course, speaks much about the nature of the art world at the moment. I'm not going to name or point to any name, but I think we're all aware of some of this. As a research platform and collective, in the initiation of this project, we both approached Keleketla Library as individuals, and this is before we formed. And then we socialized, we drank wine, and we spoke. And in the following weeks, we formed our collective, and very quickly we began planning our first project. We applied for funding, and I'm not going to lie and say we did it rigorously. We applied for funding twice, and then we gave up because self-esteem and pride. And I mean, we're not entirely in positions where we couldn't have done the project without taking from our own pockets. Our interests were geared toward the conversation or connections of Letsema and other artists, exploring collectivity and integrated networks as as an alternative. Sorry. We decided on a project that was not about making work, that is not an exhibition or a presentation of what typically is a physical manifestation, but something less tangible but long-lasting. What we wanted was a space, not necessarily physical, to nurture and encourage this network of artists who could talk, work, and support each other, but also to expand the connectivity beyond those working as visual artists to those who work as poets, writers, etc. In the beginning, our primary concerns were in the existence of Black women collectives in Johannesburg and/or Black women artists working together. We were already connected socially to a number of collectives, but most of them were made up of men. And it is from discussions with each other and other various practitioners that we noticed a lack of connection in practice, an isolated way of practicing with those artists that are part of collectives. They are these individuals, these people, these artists who graduated or emerged at about the same time, but they ignore or they devalue each other. And there is an advantage and value to having all these artists at hand. Sorry. Spring. To having these artists at hand, to be able to share resources, to collaborate, to exchange in many ways that support and elevate individual and collective work. That is why we initiated the project. Independence is another aspect we were particularly concerned with. That is, artists and collectives who practice and produce projects independently with limited resources, artists who self-publish, who make without studio, gallery, or private financial support. The Proclamation Project resulted in 4 published podcast episodes. They're available on SoundCloud. I think you saw some stuff. It's not moving. Okay, yeah. It's okay. Where was I? Oh, 4 published podcast episodes, each based on different topics, featuring nearly 30 different artists or practitioners. Some of who are part of collectives and some who are individuals. We invited artists and collectives that were interesting for their practices, ideas, as well as the fact that we had worked with or in proximity to them at some point. Essentially, we tapped into our own network. The significance of the Proclamation Project included the discussion of the ideas of creative autonomy, the value of collective practice, art world institutions, multidiscipline practice, money as a barrier, the production of space as political, social media, and online platforms as agency, as well as self-organization and visibility as a position that not only counters the dominant or mainstream trajectory, but creates new spaces. I'm just going to list the episodes. So the published episodes, again, available on SoundCloud. Please listen, because I'm not going to summarize any of the episodes. Are as follows. Episode 1 was called Stranger Things, Invisibility, and invisibility and hypervisibility of Black women artists / Black women artists in the non-representational, how to be an African woman artist. This episode featured Anti-Clockwise, Ikwembe, Kutala Jopero, and Natasha Jacobs and Matsilani. Episode 2 was Self-Organized, Fostering Networks for Collective Practice. This featured DJI Studios and Title in Transgressions. DJI Studios is a studio house and collective, and Title in Transgression is a collective. Episode 3 featured I Better Be Paying You. That was the name of the episode, I Better Be Paying You, Free Work, Freelancing, and Independence. This featured 4 independent artists working as individuals in illustration, animation, and printmaking and publishing. Episode 4 was called Virtual Diasporas, Alternative Research, Digital Practice, and Publishing. And this featured Andile Buka, Alphabet Zoo, and Katleko Shoro, a poet. There was a bonus episode as part of the Diva Talks at Wits called Volume Visibility and the Other Work, featuring Wangtola Collective and Grace Mokalapa, that hasn't been published and will be used in a different way with other unpublished material, because we're in the process, or in the moment where we're reflecting on the project and deciding what kind of because we had planned a publication, but we're deciding what kind of publication it's going to be, given that things cost money, and also how accessible it's going to be if we make whatever publication we wanted. More likely to be geared towards something online. Okay. The residency, through its intentions, foregrounded the value of exchange amongst varying individuals. It simulated a temporary market place over a period of 4 weeks in which creators of different disciplines, many of which form part of collectives, came together to share methodologies of practice, experiences, and creative knowledge from the premise of being contemporary artists or practitioners in Johannesburg. And this is evident in the hour-long conversations available on SoundCloud. Through the process of the residency, we worked with the podcast as a medium, as it spoke to the quick dispersal of information with the sense of community offered by broadcasting, as well as the kind of globality of the internet. Through it, we were able to attempt to connect with groups of creatives globally with similar sensibilities while rooted in Johannesburg, speaking to the nuances of our location with a new audience or a network. We both have a long-standing interest in podcasts and web series produced in different parts of the world, but that resonate so distinctly with current local issues. If you listen to some of the podcasts like Melanin Millennials, Black Girls Talking, Sistren, and there I don't know, hundreds of podcasts out there from people in our generation discussing similar issues in different disciplines. Some are in music, some are in just in the general practice form of just creative production houses. The internet as a medium of research is something that greatly influences both our practice. The cost to value ratio for podcasts is incredibly low. This makes podcasts a lucrative potential opportunity. It takes just a few hours of production time a week. We would record for an hour. We would take the podcast home. We would listen. We didn't edit because we wanted the conversation to be as organic as possible. So there's some shady stuff in there. And then we published the podcast a few days later, or even sometimes a day later, on SoundCloud. One of the key things is that you can access virtually almost anywhere, and there's mobility and movement without actually having to use any physical transference. The recorded conversations are the first stage of exchange and a necessary move towards more formalized critique and modes of participation with the potentiality for engagement with different publics, divergent readerships, and audiences. And it widens the scope beyond the mere conventional space of chatting in social circles. Obviously, there is limited access to the project and to the material because we're not at a point where the online and the internet is easily accessible to everyone on equal ground in South Africa. And although the United Nations has designated internet access as a human right, the platforms we use require people to tap into a resource that can be a little costly. But it is how we wanted to be engaged. And one of the tenets of the project is the exploration of social media and online platforms as agency, as well as necessary research platforms. There were requests for physical present engagement, but they would have been impractical and counter to our intentions. All but one of the platforms we use are relatively free to access if you have access to Wi-Fi or if you want to spend some data. There are costs for us as a platform, but with the exception of SoundCloud, everything was relatively free. So we are on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and SoundCloud, sorry. Oh, and if you do think about opening a SoundCloud yourself, just understand that you have to pay, it's not that expensive, it's about 80 Rand for a regular 2-hour space, but you pay for it in euros. Yeah. More importantly, relying or using these online platforms allowed us to create a space that is ours. We are and were able to control content and engagement to a certain degree. Because we mark ourselves by multipleness and the desire for barrier-free presentation, catalyzed by several structured and intense visioning processes that include reflecting our individual and shared goals. It is work that is relatively on a free domain. We also wanted to avoid the idea of a visibility with noise, to avoid the irresponsibleness of a quick fever project that is trendy and palatable, easily blogged about and promoted, because ideas and practices can and are assimilated into the mainstream and the dominant cultural production scene and lose their value. Thus, the prevailing culture of agreement that keeps particular practitioners in lesser positions is protected and the power base is maintained. In line with our reliance on free and inexpensive internet technologies, we are inspired by an open source philosophy that emphasizes collaboration instead of competition, openness instead of proprietary rights and trade secrets, and the nurturing of collectives and networks instead of profitability. The online, and that is social media and other platforms, are also imperative for organization. They start dialogues with others, form communities and connections which can lead to the formation of collaborative or collective projects and possibly occupation of physical space. We consciously refused a physical space, not only for the practicalities of it, but because we were very much focused on the virtualness of the project. Social media and other online platforms are simply a means of visibility for artists who do not have support elsewhere, and they can be used as an alternative to physical publication of material from individual artists and collectives. Online publishing, a form of self-publishing, allows for a kind of incorporating their creative practice. Social media and online platforms become powerful tools when artists are able to translate their practices in this medium, thinking through each aspect deliberately and curatorially. In ways of curating, again, I'm going to butcher a European name, Hans Ulrich Obrist, I think, recalls a conversation with the fellow curator who tells him that if he wants to curate exhibitions, then he should under no circumstances do what everybody else is doing by just giving artists a room and suggesting that they fill it with stuff. What would be more important would be to talk to the artists and ask them which projects they could not realize under existing conditions. It is from this premise that Letsema as a space, as a platform for collaboration, and what kind of creative production it can facilitate, which was not possible before the connections we made with the individuals in the project. These collaborations have come out of the 4-week residency. For instance, the musical collaboration of Puleng of Title and Transgression and Chet Cordero of DJI Studios that occurred during and after the residency begins to attest to the significance of this methodology. Matsilani also manages to exchange and use and print with DJI Studios as they have a physical studio. This is a clear enabling of the configuration of a useful social network for the initiator, which is us, the platform, as well as activating a potential space for that network to be called upon again in the future and for it to continue to grow over time. 5 minutes. Okay, almost done, I think. Anthony Davis, Stefan Dilmuth, and I think it's Jakob Jakobsen, have claimed in their co-penned essay, there is no alternative, the future is self-organized. That self-organization is, amongst other things, a social process of communication and commonality based in exchange, sharing of similar problems, knowledge, and available sources. Initiators of collectives and collaborations start with and from a position and a desire for a space of leadership, as well as production, a space of production that is unavailable. We are also seeking more active and self-empowering cultural spaces without the restrictions or necessity of an immovable institutional structure. There are possibilities and alternatives to what passes as dominant cultural production. Establishing collectives and cementing collaborations is a different way and a step further from merely working together. There's weight in that, and understanding that this is an investment of a different type of capital. Generally, these divided labors within collectives are acknowledged separately in general industries to further emphasize individual achievement. But what they do essentially is increase and encourage the individual. And this is understood in the training of artists and practitioners. The history of the disciplines, art disciplines, inform this. The star, there must only be one. And so too does society at large. It is not typical of traditional institutions to encourage collective practices that are not about producing sellable or easily consumable work. This is capital that renders value with the price tag on tangible work. If the work does not have a price tag on it, it is deemed less valuable. And in an industry that chooses 1 out of the 30, so to speak, to place value on, artists without this seek and may need other avenues for visibility, and visibility is capital. If you want prestige and critical success, you have to have a cosign from institutions, individuals with capital, and that can be social, economic, etc. These are aspects of validation that are needed, that are mediated, and they control how successful certain artists are, and they control visibility. Collectives and collaborative practices counter this. They are plural and offer validation and visibility, including the proposition of collaboration as a form of community in which belonging is not marked by coercion and control, but emphasizes the joint work of independent individuals. And this can render multiple voices edible, a prerequisite for the functioning of the society of multipleness. There is a constant, relentless call for more of us, more Black artists, more Black practitioners, and it may be that the gathering, the collective, can be a conduit for that. Choosing to work with Keleketla was not just a matter of practicality. It was a decision informed by their practice as a cultural production house, but so too their collaborative and collective practice. They have managed over the course of nearly a decade to produce projects and material that is not typically or completely soul-serving. They also seem to understand that organization is not just mere doing, but a form of practice in itself. Another reason for choosing Keleketla is that there is a value and a currency to Keleketla as an organization, and we used it, and they were generous with it. More importantly, they are and were able to be supportive of a project that in itself was a risk and that did not have a monetary or easily measurable outcome. Maybe because they know through experience, or that they seem to understand the necessity for the alternative. And most people who'd hear about our project in the beginning of the planning session would say things like, oh, that's nice, and that's cool, and good luck with that. Whereas Keleketla was very quick to say, okay, how can we do this? And how can it be mutually beneficial? Am I done? Well. Okay, I'll just change it. The gathering of people, the collectors become a market of knowledge and enables pluralist forms of exchange. I'll just jump to the conclusion, I think. Oh, sorry. And speaking of institutions, this is not to say we would not work with more typical art institutions as individual practitioners. We both work and move to different types of spaces, but would not reject these major institutions. We are weary of the way projects like these can be conflated and absorbed by an agenda propagated by the more economically and socially affluent in self-organization as a way of being. Paul O'Neill states that although in many ways all cultural projects, regardless of their resistant origins, have an uneasy and habitually codependent relationship with established institutional structures and will often necessitate their support at a future state in order to move things forward. It is not that self-organized projects outside of institutions are better, but that they do mediate some cultural discrepancy at a given moment. And it is not that they are solid alternatives to existing power structures, but that they present a possibility for spaces that can satisfy those who are neither comfortable or able to function with and within the institutions. Self-initiated projects also deduct the effects of an over-reliant culture, dependent upon our existing fixed institutional structures and conventional critical frameworks, a dependency upon more bureaucratic organizations. Thank you.